There upon the cross hangs love for you. Now, how can we see this act of love in what, especially if we look at it with, new eyes, what is a very violent act, right? A very violent act. Well, I think that one place that we can turn is again, to St. Paul. In his letter to the Romans in chapter 5, he writes to them about this idea. And it's an idea that's very profound, and it's an idea that we really can't imagine, I don't think, doing. I mean, we have to be able to think about this from the perspective of our human relationships and whether or not we could do something like this, right? He says this. He says, while we were yet helpless, right? Helpless. We're here, stuck in this relational dead end, going no place and can do nothing about it on our own. Christ died for the ungodly, right? The ungodly aren't those guys over there. They're us guys here, right? Christ died for the ungodly. He says, why, one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for a good man he will dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Right? Jesus Christ died for us. This is a very profound idea. Think about this from the perspective of if you have somebody who perhaps was, right, maybe your nemesis, right? You're the worst person in the world for you that you can imagine, right? That hurt you perhaps quite deeply. Maybe purposely, maybe didn't realize it, right? But you just couldn't stand to be around. Think about this, right? This is really not even comparable to what we did for Jesus Christ, what we did to him, right? The worst sin of possible, deicide, killing our God in the most horrible of ways. Can you now think about this, that you would lay down your life for that person at the same time that they're doing it to you, rejecting you, that you would lay down your life for them. That's a very hard thing to imagine doing. I mean, it's hard enough to even just to pray for them. It's hard enough even to want to pray for them. But laying down your life for them? Now magnify that 1,000,000 infinite trillion times. And that's what Jesus Christ has done for each and every one of us. Right? That's what he's done for each and every one of us. He's restored this communion with us. And we read about the fact, especially when we read about this idea of the cross, right? We hear, and he was crucified. And we don't really get a sense of what that really means, right? We don't get a sense of what that really means. If you've seen The Passion of the Christ, you do, right? But what I thought we might do is spend a few moments just contemplating that. I think we first ought to look at it from the perspective of the prophecy of Isaiah. Isaiah 52, the end of chapter 52 and chapter 53. This is called the suffering servant. This is the passage that Jesus Christ revealed, right? One of the passages when he said, didn't you realize that the Messiah, right, must suffer? This is what he had said. We'll start in chapter 13 of 52. Behold, my servant shall prosper, and he shall be exalted and lifted up, and shall be very high. And this is in a certain sense a double entendre. He is lifted up very high. And in first, it doesn't seem, this exaltation, right, the exaltation of the cross doesn't seem like this kind of glory that this seems to be reflecting. but it makes it very clear that that's what it's talking about in verse 14. As many were astonished at him, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the sons of men. So he shall startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they shall see, and that which they have not heard they shall understand. Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of the dry ground. He had no form, no comeliness, that we should look upon him, and no beauty, that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried away our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that made us whole, and with his stripes we are healed. But what was that chastisement that he experienced? You know, when the Passion of the Christ was made, there were many different sources that the producer, the director, used, right? There were a variety of, some of them were, some of the Gospels, of course, historical evidence of what crucifixions were. But there was one in particular that stood out. There was a book that was written in the 1950s by a French surgeon, Pierre Barbet. It's called The Doctor at Calvary. And what Dr. Barbet did is he looked at and studied the Shroud of Turin. And he looked at really what he could discern from what this man in the shroud went through, based upon, of course, the science of the time. And he describes, kind of in a meditation, what this was like, what this was about. Now, there's a long meditation here at the end, and we're not going to go through all of it, but I'm going to pick some particular passages from it that can help us to recognize what the Son, right, with Jesus Christ, as soon as he was mature enough, right, who came to us as a baby, who trusted humanity, right, with his humanity, came to us as a baby, allowed the Blessed Mother, right, two human beings to raise him to maturity. What he knew when he was mature enough to understand this, when his human maturity allowed this, he recognized what was coming. Right? He recognized what was coming in the garden when he prayed, right? If this cup could be taken away from me, please take this cup. But of course he says, not my will, thy will be done. So we'll pick up really at the crucifixion. And this is what Dr. Barbet says. He says, it's not very complicated. The executioners knew their work. First of all, he must be stripped. The lower garments are dealt with easily enough, but the coat has firmly stuck to his wounds. That is to say, his whole body. And this stripping is a horrible business. Have you ever removed a dressing which has been on a large bruised wound and has dried upon it? Or have you yourself ever been through this ordeal, which sometimes requires a general anesthetic? If so, you know what it's like. Each thread has stuck to a raw surface, and when it is removed, it tears away one of the innumerable nervous ends which have been laid bare by the wounds. These thousands of painful shocks add up and multiply, each one increasing the sensitivity of the nervous system. Now, it's not just a question of a local lesion, but of almost the whole surface of the body. and especially that dreadful back. The executioners are in a hurry and set about it with their work roughly. Perhaps it is better thus. But how does this sharp, dreadful pain not bring about a fainting fit? How clear it is from the beginning to the end that he dominates. He directs his passion. The blood streams down yet again. They lay him down on his back. Have they left him the narrow loincloth which the modesty of the Jews has been able to preserve for those who condemned him to this death? I must admit that I do not know. It is of little importance in any case. In the shroud he will be naked. The wounds on his back and on his thighs and on the calves of his legs become caked with dust and with tiny pieces of gravel. He has been placed at the foot of the stipes. The stipes is the upright portion of the cross, and his shoulders lying on the patibulum. This is the crosspiece. The executioners take the measurements. A stroke with an auger to prepare the holes for the nails, and then the horrible deed begins. An assistant holds out one of the arms with the palm uppermost. The executioner takes hold of the nail, a long nail, pointed and square, which near its head is 1/3 of an inch thick. He gives him a prick on the wrist in that forward fold which he knows by experience. A single blow with a great hammer and the nail is fixed into the wood, in which a few vigorous taps fix it firmly. Jesus has not yet cried out, but his face is contracted in a terrible way. But above all, I see at the same time that his thumb, with a violent gesture, is striking against the palm of his hand. His median nerve has been touched. I realize what he has been through. An inexpressible pain darts like lightning through his fingers, and then like a trail of fire right up his shoulder and bursts into his brain. The most unbearable pain that a man can experience is caused by wounding the great nervous centers. It nearly always causes a fainting fit, and it is fortunate that it does. But Jesus has not willed that he should lose consciousness. Now it is not as if the nerves were cut right across, but no, it's only partially destroyed. The raw place on the nervous center remains in contact with the nail, and later on, when the body sags, it will be stretched out against this like a violin string against the bridge, and it will vibrate with each shaking or movement, reviving the horrible pain. And this goes on for 3 hours. The body is meanwhile only held by nails fixed into the 2 wrists, once more those median nerves. He could be held fast with nothing else. The body is not slipping forward, but the rule is that the feet should be fixed. There is no need of a bracket for this. They bend the knees and stretch the feet out flat on the wood of the stipes. Why then, since it is useless, is the carpenter given this work to do? It is certainly not in order to lessen the pain of the crucified. The left foot is flat against the cross. With one blow of the hammer, the nail is driven into the middle of it. The assistant then bends the other knee, and the executioner, bringing the left foot round in front of the right, which is the assistant is holding flat, pierces this foot with a second blow in the same place. This is easy enough, and with a few vigorous blows with a hammer, the nail is well embedded in the wood. This time, thank God, it is a more ordinary pain, but the agony has scarcely begun. The whole work has not taken the 2 men much more than 2 minutes, and the wounds have not bled much. They then deal with the 2 thieves, and the 3 gibbets are arranged facing the city which kills its God. And we'll jump ahead. But a moment later, a strange phenomena occurs that Jesus is now up on the cross. The muscles of his arms stiffen of themselves in a contraction which becomes more and more accentuated. His deltoid muscles in his biceps become strained and stand out. His fingers are drawn sharply inwards. He is cramping. You have all experienced this acute, progressive pain in the calves of the legs between the ribs, a little everywhere. but one must immediately relax the contracted muscles by extending it. But watch. On his thighs and on his legs there are monstrous, rigid bulges, and his toes are bent. It is like a wounded man suffering from tetanus, a prey to those horrible spasms which, once seen, can never be forgotten. When the cramps become generalized, this is now what happens. The stomach muscles become tightened in set undulations, then the intercostal muscles, then the muscles of the neck, then the respiratory. His breathing gradually becomes shorter and lighter. His sides, which have already drawn upward by the traction of the arms, are now exaggeratedly so. The solar plexus sinks inward, and so do the hollows under the collarbone. The air enters with a whistling sound, but scarcely any comes out any longer. He is breathing in the upper regions of his lungs only. He breathes in a little, but cannot breathe out. He thirsts for air. A flush has gradually spread over his pale face. It has turned a violent purple, and then blue. He is asphyxiating. His lungs, which are loaded with air, can no longer empty themselves. His forehead is covered with sweat. His eyes are prominent and rolling, with an appalling pain must be hammering in his head. He is going to die. Well, it is best so. Has he not yet suffered enough? But no, his hour has not yet come. Neither thirst, nor hemorrhage, nor asphyxia, nor pain will be able to overcome the Savior God. And if he dies with these symptoms, he will only die in truth because he freely wills it. Slowly, with a superhuman effort, he is using the nails in his feet as a fulcrum. That is to say, he is pressing on his wounds. The ankles and the knees stretch them out bit by bit, and the whole body is gradually lifted, thus relieving the pressure on the arms, a pressure which was very nearly 240 pounds in each hand. We thus see how, through his own efforts, the phenomenon grows less. The muscles become relaxed. Anyway, those of the chest. The breathing becomes more ample and moves down to a lower level. The lungs are unloaded and the face soon resumes its former pallor. Why is he making this effort? In order to speak to us. Yes, may he indeed forgive us, we who are his executioners. But a moment later his body begins to sink down once more. Each time he speaks, and each time that he wishes to breathe, it will be necessary for him to straighten himself, to get back his breath, holding himself upright on the nail through his feet. Each moment has its echoes, so to speak, in his hands, in inexpressible pain. Those median nerves once again. It is a question of periodic asphyxiation of the poor unfortunate who is being strangled and then allowed to come back to life, to be choked once more several times over. He can only escape from this asphyxiation for a moment at a time, and then at a cost of terrible suffering, and by an effort of the will. And this is going to last 3 hours. So, there's more that we could read, but this is, I think, a meditation about a little bit of what Jesus went through. This is what we should be thinking about or meditating about when we see, right, and he was crucified. This is the great love that he has for us. This is the love that he expressed for us. Remember, we had read before that he prayed that those who believe in him, right, those who commit themselves to him in this communion, that they may all be one. And this is what he went through to make us one. He showed us what total self-gift can mean in a world that has chosen not God. But we have only got part of the story. We're still here. Jesus died so that we could be joined with him. Next lesson, we will talk about how that comes about.